Welcome to Weekly News Highlights. Electric vehicle maker Tesla wants to start building a large vehicle assembly plant in the southwestern United States as early as the third quarter of this year. According to documents filed with Texas officials, the automaker wants to invest about $1 billion to build a 4 million to 5 million square foot vehicle assembly plant employing 5,000 people on the grounds of what is now a cement operation near Austin. But it needs tax breaks to make the site competitive with an alternative location in Oklahoma. Earlier, Tesla CEO Elon Musk previously hinted about a Texas plant, and Texas Governor Greg Abbott has spoken with Musk about the possibility. According to reports, the plant would build Tesla's electric pickup truck and Model Y SUV. The United Nations Refugee Agency is marking this year's World Refugee Day with the message that every action counts as it faces the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic and record numbers of people forced from their homes by war and extreme weather. Conflict, hunger, and economic upheaval had displaced nearly 80 million people worldwide, half of them children, by the end of 2019, nearly twice as many a decade ago. The UN Refugee Agency, the UNHCR, said Syrians, Venezuelans, Afghans, South Sudanese, and stateless Rohingya from Myanmar topped the list of 79.5 million refugees, asylum seekers, and internally displaced people. The World Health Organization Director General, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, warned that the world has entered a dangerous new pandemic phase and that the spread of COVID-19 is accelerating. In a virtual briefing from Geneva on Friday, Ghebreyesus said, "The virus is still spreading fast, and most people are still susceptible," adding the 150,000 new cases recorded the day before his address was the highest in a single day, and nearly half of those were in the Americas. The Public Authority of Agriculture, alongside the Kuwait municipality, and a volunteer group headed by Saleh Al-Seif, known as We Care, have joined forces in pursuit of reviving Kuwait's plantation in several parks within residential areas. Kuwait's plantation has suffered due to the exceptional circumstances the country witnessed as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdown, which prevented workers from maintaining Kuwait's plantation. Anwar Jabouri brings us more.
The COVID-19 pandemic did not only have a negative impact on businesses and social and cultural life in Kuwait, but as a result of the lockdown and curfew imposed locally, the Kuwait greenery and plantation went uncared for. However, like-minded people have joined forces in pursuit of rescuing Kuwait's plantation.
Actually, it's been an initiative by Sheikh Amthal Al-Ahmed, having seen the plantation sort of die down because of the hot weather on one hand and because of the lack of workers on the other. So it was initiated, or the initiative was to watering the plantation or the parks and the residential areas in Kuwait. And our team here in Adaliya has taken that initiative forward, and in cooperation with the Kuwait municipality, and they brought some water tankers to start watering the parks and the streets of Adaliya, among other residential areas.
Bringing life back to the Kuwait plantation is currently taking place in various residential areas across Kuwait by a volunteer group called We Care, in collaboration with the Public Authority of Agriculture and the Kuwait municipality.
So we're here today as a group of volunteers and helping with the Kuwait Voluntary Center in terms of, if you will, rescuing the plantations that have been unfortunately forgotten because of all the lockdowns and curfews, because the environment actually deserves our attention, and especially during these very hot times that we live here in Kuwait, especially during the summer season. Definitely, and as you can consider the environment, especially the plantations, as the lungs that breathe clean air for us, so we need to rescue these lungs in these difficult times of COVID-19.
We Care volunteers' objective is to reach as many parks and plantations as possible in the residential areas and rescue them, especially during these times where Kuwait is in the midst of the hot summer season.
The UN Human Rights Council last week condemned discriminatory and violent policing after the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis last month, and ordered a report on systemic racism against people of African descent. The 47-member state forum in Geneva unanimously adopted a resolution brought by African countries. The mandate also asks the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, to examine government responses to peaceful protests, including accusations of excessive use of force, and deliver findings in a year's time. Meanwhile, the Trump administration, which quit the forum 2 years ago, alleging bias against its ally Israel, made no immediate comment. U.S. Ambassador to the UN in Geneva, Andrew Bremberg, earlier said that his country was not above scrutiny as it grappled with racial discrimination, but was implementing police reforms after Floyd's murder. Spain will apply controls on tourists arriving in the country as it opens its borders to EU and Schengen area countries for a much-needed tourism boost this week. Spain's health minister, Salvador Illa, said there will be 3 primary controls for tourists: a passenger location card with basic data of their trip schedule and health data from the person, as well as a temperature check, and finally a visual control to ensure the traveler is healthy. The minister said the government was working on finalizing a list of which countries were deemed safe for Spain to open borders with from July the 1st. Moving to Egypt, President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi last week asked his army to be ready to carry out any mission inside or outside the country amid tensions over regional rival Turkey's intervention in neighboring Libya. He also warned forces loyal to the internationally recognized Government of National Accord, or the GNA, in Tripoli, not to cross the current front line with Khalifa Haftar's eastern-based Libyan National Army, or the LNA. President el-Sisi's remarks came as he toured an airbase near Egypt's western border with Libya. Organized by a volunteer group called Kuwait Top Team in collaboration with the Kuwait municipality and the Jordanian community, a beach cleanup event recently took place in Salmieh on the Gulf Road. As a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, the movements of many organizations in Kuwait was restricted, hindering the movement of people and organizations in attending to their humanitarian efforts in a variety of fields, including the environment and plantations. However, non-profit organizations, as well as private entities and members of society, are taking various initiatives to focus on matters that were affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. More on the following with Ghanwa Jabouri.
Keeping Kuwait clean is a priority that cannot be neglected. Keeping the environment clean helps communities enjoy clean air. Therefore, several volunteers in collaboration with Kuwait municipality and the Jordanian community have taken the initiative to clean as many beaches as they can in an effort to keep Kuwait clean.
Because this is, it's a duty for every person. It's come from inside. Nobody asked me to come. This is my country. I have to serve it, and I have to also present the organization that I'm helping my country. So it's going to be a good example for all the people there. It's returned to us for, it's good to see our places clean. because if it's dirty, it creates diseases, and you know, this coronavirus and all this. So we have to keep everything clean and everything, you know, look good. Also for the view, you know, when you see it, you feel good from inside. So that's why.
According to volunteers and participants of the beach cleanup event, the COVID-19 pandemic brought on unfavorable circumstances, restraining the movements of organizations and society as a whole. Nonetheless, society, private organizations, and non-profit organizations are intensifying their efforts through various campaigns to attend to a number of matters that were neglected due to the disruptions the novel coronavirus entailed.
Actually, we came here to support the Kuwait top team in their campaign to clean up the beach and the area surrounding the coast in Salmi area. I feel so exciting having many nationalities around us, and we feel like this is part of our support to the community we live in and to the support to the country we all belong and we love so much.
The beach cleanup is a collaborative work by like-minded people joining forces with the one objective: keep Kuwait clean.
The European Parliament wants European Union governments to assign new sources of revenue to the bloc to repay the European Commission borrowing for the recovery and finance the next long-term budget. The Parliament's head, David Sassoli, told a news conference after speaking to EU leaders that unless such new revenue dedicated to the EU were agreed, the Parliament would not sign off on the next budget and recovery plan now under discussion. Last week, in a video conference, the 27 national heads discussed the bloc's recovery that has lost over 100,000 lives to COVID-19 and faces an unprecedented economic downturn threatening its stability and global standing. With the continued escalation of the COVID-19 pandemic and the extension of the first phase due to the increasing numbers of infections, cooperative societies are keen to continue the complete readiness following the safety guidelines. According to the Ministry of Health, cooperative societies play an important role in the implementation of safety guidelines and take social responsibility in order to serve all citizens and residents under this pandemic. Isra al-Shamiri has more.
In the light of the current circumstances with the continued spread of coronavirus, Yarmouk Cooperative Society keen to be fully prepared to receive a greater number of citizens in terms of the availability of food stocks and to submit special offers after the approval of the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, along with keenness to implement safety guidelines according to the Minister of Health in terms of the providing an external sterilization device and measure the temperature before entering.
A crisis and emergency team was established to monitor and implement all the new government's regulations on the corona pandemic in relations with Yarmouk Cooperative Society. This team prepared all the safety procedures for our employees and customers and ensured a strategic reserve of all customer goods for a period of 6 months. We also assisted our local medical center with housing for their local nurses, and we have also assisted our local mosques with providing their employees with meals.
Accordingly, the Minister of Health was keen to carry out the responsibilities of each other, especially to pass this phase safety, and the Yarmouk Cooperative Society care to provide a stock of all the safety necessary items from face masks and gloves.
We provided our customers sanitizers and gloves prior to entering all our supermarkets, with ensuring the cleanness and sanitization to all the carts and cashier counters.
However, providing the protective acrylic barrier between the cashier and the customer play an important safety role, and the Yarmouk Cooperative Society care to increase the provision of hand sanitizers throughout all the association.
By ensuring our employees and customers' safety, we cleaned and sanitized our supermarkets, offices, and warehouses. We also provided to our shareholders a sanitizer and cleaning boxes which was distributed to all the families of our shareholders. We would like to thank all our customers for helping us in the panic period, where they helped us in organizing themselves.
All authorities and institutions are greatly continuing showing efforts, hoping that all citizens and residents continue to cooperate in implementing the safety guidelines to pass this phase.
The Ring of Fire was seen across Kuwait last Sunday. A solar eclipse always occurs about 2 weeks before or after a lunar eclipse. Even if the day has darkened, looking at a solar eclipse with the naked eye is dangerous. Skywatchers along a narrow band from West Africa to the Arabian Peninsula, India, and southern China witnessed the most dramatic Ring of Fire solar eclipse to shadow the Earth in years. Remarkably, the eclipse on Sunday arrives on the Northern Hemisphere's longest day of the year, the summer solstice, when Earth's North Pole is tilted most directly towards the Sun. The show began with the partial phase of the eclipse, when the moon starts to touch the Sun's edge at 7:19 a.m. and ended at 9:56 a.m., with the maximum phase of the solar eclipse taking place at 8:32 a.m. The Kuwait Institute for Scientific Research, or KISR, continued its efforts aimed at controlling the spread of COVID-19 in the country by launching several programs and initiatives. The Science and Technology Publishing Program, or the STPP, was established to support researchers with tools and training to enhance KISR's scientific publication productivity. More details in the following report with Hidil Fahed.
Kuwait Institute for Scientific Research is replete with qualified and experienced national researchers and scientific technicians from national ready to carry out all the applied researches needed. KISR presented a project for the early detection of the coronavirus and its spread in the air.
Detection of viral loads in the air at closed areas that people expresses either the symptoms by coughing and sneezing or even breathing, and these areas can be a potential hazard that the virus itself is sustainable in that areas for a certain time to infect other people and circulating in that area.
And the impact of high temperatures, of the effectiveness of the virus transmission.
The heat which is in the climate that reaches 20, 30 or 40 degrees, that doesn't do much killing or inactivation of the virus alone. It is joined by the solar radiance, which is the main effective source of viral inactivation, and the heat is adjacent effect, and that's how by that temperature it can kill the virus in a shorter time with the aid of light.
Citizens and residents are requested to take precautions, observe the social distancing, and abide by the instructions and guidance to avoid the re-increase of coronavirus infected cases due to contact after reimposing the partial ban.
Last Sunday, tennis player Grigor Dimitrov, who competed alongside Novak Djokovic, Dominic Thiem, and Alexander Zverev in last week's Adria Tour debut in Belgrade, Serbia, announced that he tested positive for COVID-19. Following Dimitrov's positive test, the Adria Tour final in Zadar, Croatia, between Novak Djokovic and Andrei Rublev was cancelled. Around 1 million Palestinian refugees in Gaza face food shortages due to Israel's continued blockade and slashed global funding for the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees. Marking the World Refugee Day, Palestinian officials said that a genuine decline in support from donors has had serious repercussions on the Palestinian refugees in Gaza, the West Bank, Jerusalem, and other Arab states. Our correspondent in Gaza, Yumna El Sayed, has the details in the following report.
Refugees International Day comes this year in even worse conditions than the year before. Not only Palestinian refugees have not returned to their confiscated lands, but also the Israeli occupation seeks to widen the circle of its injustice through its intention to annex parts of the West Bank and impose its sovereignty over the Jordan Valley, which kills the right of refugees and their dream to return to their lands from which they were abandoned.
In the event of annexation, of course, we will have a new problem with the increase in the number of refugees who are the residents of the Valley region, and they will be directed to the remaining West Bank lands and Gaza Strip, which will increase the burden of the Palestinian refugees and enormously increase their numbers, which will lead to a real disaster by all accounts.
This year also shows a significant decline in the levels of support provided by all parties, which has serious repercussions on the refugees in Gaza, the West Bank and Jerusalem, where the food security of nearly 1 million refugees in the Gaza Strip is threatened by the Israeli blockade and the reduction in humanitarian aid provided by UNRWA.
Here in the Gaza Strip, the situation is very difficult. The unemployment rate, even before coronavirus, it was about 55%, and now it's rising to nearly 80%. The blockade is more than 13 years. It resulted in destroying all the private sector, most of the private sector actually. The unemployment rate is huge, unprecedented, and I think that if things will continue like that it will increase all the phenomena that connected to poverty and socioeconomic.
The reality in Gaza Strip doesn't get any better, where the percentage of those under the poverty line reaches 85%, and there is a clear lack of humanitarian aid reaching the Strip due to the blockade, in a time when relief and humanitarian aid must increase with increasing rates of poverty and unemployment.
In Belgrade, Serbia's ruling Conservative Party, led by President Aleksandar Vučić, is set for a landslide win in parliamentary elections. President Vučić, whose Serbia's Progressive Party SNS was on track to win 63% of the vote in the elections, said the week would be very difficult, starting with the arrival of the EU Special Representative for Serbian-Kosovar dialogue in Belgrade on June the 22nd. The Emirate of Abu Dhabi has eased restrictions to allow movement between its cities for all residents, but extended restrictions on the entry into the Emirate by non-residents. The Abu Dhabi Emergency Crisis and Disaster Committee for the COVID-19 pandemic, in collaboration with the Abu Dhabi Police and Department of Health, announced that all residents will now be allowed to move between Abu Dhabi's regions, Abu Dhabi, Al Ain, and Al Dhafra from 6 a.m. starting June the 23rd. The easing of restrictions follows the promising indicators regarding the number of COVID-19 cases found through testing in the Emirate. After months of taking classes online due to lockdown restrictions, some yoga enthusiasts in Toronto, Canada, were able to mark International Day of Yoga practicing their poses in individual clear geodesic domes. The event, which lasts until July 31st, is hosted by Lemons Outdoor Studio, partnering with 6 local studios, where every student is assigned their own dome, which stands more than 7 feet tall and 12 feet wide, with built-in heating regulation that creates a similar atmosphere as a hot yoga studio. Organizers said they decided to launch this event following the abrupt closure of all non-essential businesses that continues to prevent students from visiting fitness facilities, and as there is no official reopening date in sight for these venues. In golf, Webb Simpson birdied 3 of his final 4 holes to emerge with victory at the PGA Tour's tightly contested RBC Heritage in South Carolina. The 34-year-old recorded his 7th career win on the tour after his bogey-free 64 saw him finish on a combined 22 under par 262, a stroke clear of Mexico's Abraham Answers at 65. Next on the schedule is the Travelers Championship from June 24th to the 27th as TPC River Highlands in Cromwell, Connecticut, another event where fans are not allowed to attend. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia started a fund with an initial capital of $4 billion to develop its tourism industry as the oil-rich kingdom seeks to diversify its economy and attract more foreign travelers. According to a statement from the Ministry of Tourism, the Tourism Development Fund will launch a range of equity and debt investment vehicles and has $45 billion in Memorandum of Understandings signed with private banks. The funding will be deployed to support mixed-use destinations, to address gaps in the tourism value chain, and to enable technologically enhanced tourism. The Arab coalition intercepted and destroyed a ballistic missile launched by the Houthi militia that was headed towards Saudi Arabia's capital, Riyadh. Coalition spokesperson Colonel Turki al-Maliki stated the terrorist Houthi militia is continuing to deliberately and systematically target civilians and civilian objects that are protected under international humanitarian law with ballistic missiles and UAVs. Earlier, the Arab coalition welcomed the Yemeni government and the Separatist Southern Transitional Council, or STC, willingness to consider Saudi Arabia's call for a ceasefire in Yemen. Loudspeakers blaring propaganda across the border were seen reinstalled in North Korea after such systems were taken down since the two Koreas signed an accord in 2018 to cease all hostilities. A spokeswoman at South Korea's Defense Ministry reiterated at a regular briefing that Pyongyang will have to pay for the consequences if it continues to defy joint efforts to foster peace. Tensions between the two Koreas has risen in recent weeks after the North destroyed a joint liaison office on its side of the border and declared an end to dialogue. Meanwhile, a group of South Korean activists held a rally in the inter-Korean border area to urge the government to take actions to stop defectors sending propaganda leaflets across the border. Kuwait and Saudi Arabia plan to resume oil production from their jointly operated Khafji and Wafra oil fields on the 1st of July. Deputy Chief Executive for Finance and Management at Kuwait Gulf Oil Company said output from Khafji oil field, which was halted for a month, is expected to be about 80,000 barrels per day before rising to 100,000 2 months later. Production is expected to reach 175,000 barrels per day from the Khafji field by the year's end. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation, or the OIC, welcomes Saudi Arabia's decision to allow performance of this year's Hajj, but only for people living inside the kingdom. OIC Secretary General Dr. Yusuf al-Uthaymeen said the Saudi decision guarantees safe performance of Hajj rituals amidst threats posed by COVID-19. The Secretary General said the decision is within preventative measures adopted by the Saudi government since the outbreak of the pandemic. He added that protecting human life is a major principle of Islamic Sharia, and many pilgrims performing Hajj are usually old people and would be at high risk. Apple Chief Executive Tim Cook said that the company will switch to its own chips for its Mac computers, stating that the first machine will ship this year, ending a nearly 15-year reliance on Intel Corp to supply processors for its flagship laptops and desktop. The news came at Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference, which was being held online this year for the first time due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Cook said that Apple expects the Mac transition to take about 2 years, and that Apple still has some Intel-based computers in its pipeline that it will support for many years. The China National Biotech Group, or CNBG, has won approval to run a large-scale Phase 3 clinical trial of its novel coronavirus vaccine candidate in the United Arab Emirates. China is seeking to trial potential vaccines overseas because of a lack of new patients at home. Over a dozen experimental vaccines are being trialed around the world. none of them has yet successfully completed a late-stage Phase 3 test to determine efficacy in shielding healthy people from the virus, which has killed over 470,000 people around the world. Such trials involve thousands of participants and normally take place in countries where the virus is widespread, so that the vaccine can be observed in a real-life environment. However, China reported fewer than 10 new local cases a day on average last month, and its researchers are now looking abroad. Units of CNBG have developed 2 potential vaccines, which have together been given to over 2,000 people in previous tests in China. US and Russian negotiators concluded a round of nuclear arms control talks in Austria's capital Vienna, aimed at producing a new agreement to replace the New Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, or START, which expires next year. US negotiators said that the talks had been productive enough to establish several technical working groups to probe deeper into the issue in order to pave the way for a second round of talks by late July or early August. US negotiators added that US and Russia agreed at the termination of the talks that the strategic environment has changed significantly since the new START treaty was signed. North Korea announced it will suspend military action plans against South Korea after a meeting of the governing party's Central Military Commission, presided over by President Kim Jong-un. The North Korean leader presided over the meeting, where members took stock of the prevailing situation before deciding to suspend the military plans. Political tensions between the two Koreas have been rising over Pyongyang's objections to plans by defector-led groups in the south to fly propaganda leaflets across the border. Residents evacuated apartment buildings in Mexico City after a 7.4 magnitude quake struck the capital, killing at least 4 people nationally. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador said there were no serious damages after the quake hit southern Mexico's Pacific coast, killing at least 4 people, buckling paved roads, and cutting off isolated villages. The president said 1 person had died in Huatulco, on the Pacific coast near the quake's epicenter in Oaxaca. Quakes over magnitudes over 7 are a major earthquake capable of widespread and heavy damage. Morgan Stanley Capital International, or the MSCI, will implement the reclassification of the MSCI Kuwait indexes from frontier market status to emerging market status. The Kuwait Capital Marketing Authority said this step will coincide with the November 2020 semi-annual index review. Earlier, the Capital Market Authority said, although Kuwait has met the requirements of reclassification, the MSCI put off the move until November due to the massive fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic on the global economy and the movement of investments. That's it for tonight. Join us again next week for more weekly news highlights.